Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Ask Me Anything Medicaid. For those of you who are just joining us, if you're new to MRCC, welcome. We're a statewide farm and rural organization started in the 1980s and 1985, and we've been doing healthcare for a long, long time. One of the things that we have found folks have a lot of questions about, and it can be pretty confusing, is Medicaid. It's a pretty complex program. So welcome to our first expert. We're going to do this wonderful thing where we bring in someone much smarter than me to help answer your questions. So my name is Dina Vanderzalm. I am the healthcare organizer. Sort of behind the scenes, I want to give a shout out to Jamie Blair. She is running technology and making us look much smarter than we are by ourselves. And we are bringing in now our expert is Jamie Rodriguez, who is the Director of Public Benefits Programs for Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. So as Jamie and I were talking a little bit about getting ready for this, we realized that just saying a bunch of stuff would be kind of overwhelming. So she brilliantly has put together a couple of slides for folks. So get your questions ready, but pay attention because she may answer some of your top questions with what we prepared. You can go ahead and ask questions, just chat them in, and we will have plenty of time to get to them at the end. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Jamie.
Hi, everyone. So as Dina said, my name is Jamie Rodriguez, and I'm an attorney with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. So I'm going to have them put my slideshow up so you can see my little PowerPoint deck here. So on this first slide is my organization's logo. So Legal Services of Eastern Missouri is a nonprofit organization, and we provide free legal services for low-income clients. We serve 21 counties in Eastern Missouri, but no matter where you live in Missouri, there is a legal aid organization that will cover your county. My organization represents clients in civil, so that means non-criminal matters. And we do a lot of things, but they include family law, immigration, consumer, education, housing. I help people with public benefits, and that includes Medicaid, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. So first, I wanted to start with just the basics. What is Medicaid? So first of all, Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicare is a federal program that provides health coverage if you are 65 or older, or you are under 65 and have a disability. And Medicare, if you fit in those groups, you can get it no matter your income. Medicaid is a little different. Medicaid is a joint federal and state program, and it provides health coverage for people who are low income. Medicaid is a partnership. So the federal government sets some basic ground rules, and states have the flexibility to design their own programs within those rules. The federal government provides more than half of the program's costs. In Missouri, our Medicaid program is called MoHealthNet. So many states choose to brand their programs to be state-specific names, which can get a little confusing. In Kansas, Medicaid is called KanCare, and in Oklahoma, it's called SoonerCare, and in Missouri, it's called MoHealthNet. So Medicaid is not a cash benefit, and enrollees do not get a monthly check. Medicaid is health insurance, just like the health insurance your employer might provide as part of your benefits package at work. And enrollees get a MoHealthNet card, just like I have a United card for my health insurance. So next, I'd like to talk about who Medicaid covers. I've listed out a few groups on this slide. These are the people who can be covered by Medicaid in Missouri right now. And the vast majority of people on Medicaid are kids. So now let's look at a little pie chart to see how that coverage breaks down by population group. So this chart shows you a breakdown of who's enrolled in Medicaid in Missouri. The green slice, that big green slice, is kids. So as you can see, that is most of our Medicaid enrollment in our state. So let's move on from the chart and talk a little bit more about Medicaid in Missouri. In Missouri, our state's Department of Social Services is the agency that's in charge of Medicaid. And within that department, there are two divisions that help run Medicaid in Missouri. First, the Family Support Division, which does eligibility determinations to see if you qualify. And second, the MoHealthNet Division. And that's the division that actually administers or runs the program. So they're the ones who would send you an insurance card, pay bills from your provider, things like that. So you can see that Medicaid covers 1 out of every 6 Missourians, almost half of all of Missouri's children, pays for 38% of all births in the state, and 65% of all nursing home care in Missouri. So let's move to the next slide. So Medicaid, it's important to understand, is good insurance. It's full medical coverage, full dental coverage, no deductibles, no copays for almost all services, and for most enrollees, free transportation to medical appointments. So eligibility can be pretty complicated, but I wanted to do a really broad overview of how you can qualify for Medicaid. So first, let's talk about eligibility for kids. I wanted to show you some numbers so you can get a better sense of which families might qualify for MoHealthNet for Kids. I've listed out a family size of 2 and also a family size of 4, just to give you an idea here. So this first set of incomes is for non-CHIP coverage. As you can see, non-CHIP coverage is for families who are pretty low income. The next set of incomes is for CHIP level coverage. So this coverage is available to kids whose families have higher incomes, but this kind of coverage might come with a monthly premium. So it would be a sliding scale premium, and I can't list them out in neat bullet points because they'll be calculated based on your family size and your income. And CHIP stands for Children's Health Insurance Program, which was kind of a change to the rules to open up Medicaid to kids whose families have a bit higher income. So that is eligibility for kids. And now let's move on.
Sorry, I just want to jump in. So we lost the slideshow for just a second.
Okay.
But I wanted to, we have a comment here. So our tech wizard behind the scene here, I think her computer battery kicked her out. So while she is getting back in, just wanted to stop. I'd had a question in advance about eligibility. You'd said that Medicare and Medicaid are not the same. Could you just talk for a second about like what is dual eligibility? Because I know some people are on both, and that's a little bit confusing for folks.
Yes, definitely. So dual eligibility means you're eligible for both Medicaid and Medicare. So you're dually eligible. You're eligible for both those things. So sometimes we call those people duals, but people who are dually eligible will be people who are either elderly or disabled. So the Medicaid coverage type, which we haven't gotten to yet, we haven't done the adult eligibility yet, but both of those groups, elderly or disabled people, they would be on MoHealthNet for the aged, blind, and disabled. And people who are elderly, 65 or older, or on SSI can get Medicare. People who are on SSDI, so Social Security Disability Insurance, they can also get Medicare, but after a 24-month waiting period. So those are the two groups of people who might be dually eligible, elderly or disabled. And it's important to know disabled people might be on SSI or Supplemental Security Income or SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. And Medicaid is important for duals because it can provide services that Medicare does not, like consumer-directed personal care services and non-emergency medical transportation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, we've got the slideshow back up. We are on the eligibility adults, so where you're talking about HealthNet for the age, blind, and disabled.
Perfect. Can we go back actually one slide prior? Thank you. Okay. So sorry about that. So eligibility for kids we covered. So now let's talk about eligibility for adults. So these two programs listed here are the only two programs available for adults who are not elderly or disabled. So Mo Health Net for pregnant women is a time-limited benefit. It lasts for the pregnancy plus 60 days postpartum. And Mo Health Net for families is a program for very low income parents or caregivers. And I do want to flag that it is very low income. So these are monthly incomes. For a family of two, the limit is $313. So now we can move on to the next slide about adult eligibility. So Mo Health Net for the aged, blind, and disabled. This is the program for adults who are elderly or disabled, and that includes people who are blind. As you can see, this program has income limits like the others that we've already talked about. It also has resource limits. So a resource is anything of value to you. It could be money in a bank account or investments like stocks or a retirement account like a 401k or a Roth IRA. It could also be a physical thing you own, like a second car or a home besides the one that you live in. And you can see on this slide that I put some asterisks next to the income limits for this program. And that's because if you meet all of the other eligibility criteria, it is still possible to get this type of Medicaid, even if your income is higher than that limit. But if it is higher, you would have to meet a monthly spend down for each month that you want to activate and use your coverage. So spend down is a pretty complicated program. It can be very confusing. I can't summarize it really neatly here, but I'm happy to answer specific questions that you have about how spend down works.
Hey, Jamie, we have one question on this slide. Is the income gross or net that you're talking about here?
It is gross.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So it is gross. The only things that are taken kind of into consideration in your Medicaid budget, which is how the agency arrives at your countable income and compares it to these limits, there are some things they take into consideration, namely medical expenses. And by that, I mean like recurring medical expenses. Most commonly what we see is maybe someone has a Medicare Part B premium they pay every month, or maybe they have like some sort of private plan they purchase that they pay every month. If they have like a Part D, like a Silver Script, something like that, those kind of medical expenses can be factored into your Medicaid spend down budget. But it is gross income, and that's really the only caveat to that. And then my last slide with content, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some changes in the Medicaid program in response to the current public health crisis. So first of all, Family Support Division offices remain closed. You can still reach the agency at the phone number listed. Right now, no Medicaid cases should be closing. So since mid-March, all of the cases should be frozen and they should stay open through the duration of the crisis. And we don't know when that is. So we don't know when that's going to end. We don't have a date, but it's just to be continued for now. And there are only a few exceptions to that freeze on case closings. And those are if somebody dies, if somebody moves out of Missouri, or if somebody asks for their coverage to be closed. Otherwise, cases should stay open. And I also put on there the annual reviews that were supposed to take place in March, April, and May are pushed out 12 months to next year. And you can see I listed a few changes to the program that make it easier for people to access doctors, services, and medications. And finally, there's a new COVID category of Medicaid. So this is actually just the Mo Health Net for the aged, blind, and disabled category that we talked about a moment ago. But right now, if you're positive for COVID, that in itself is proof that you are disabled, and that coverage lasts for 90 days. So I'm gonna go to this last slide here. I know that was a lot of information, and I'm happy to take any questions you have. So I specialize in Mo Health Net for the aged, blind, and disabled. as you saw just briefly, all of the programs have different rules. And so we kind of specialize in just one type, but I have a colleague who's standing by to help me out if I get questions I'm not able to answer about programs for kids or families. And some questions, it's important to note, might not be answerable in this format because my answer might rely on really specific personal information that we don't want to discuss in this very public setting. So for those questions, I've included both LSEM's phone number and my personal contact information. So please feel free to reach out to talk about your specific problem if we're not able to address it here. And with that, I'll go to any questions we have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are maybe just joining in here, so this is our Medicaid Ask Me Anything with Jamie Rodriguez from the Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. We are thrilled to have her. I've seen some conversation, so I'm just checking our chat here. We have a couple of things we want to do. Assistant to Jamie here in the background. Can we put up our first sort of myth? So we have some true false sort of myth buster questions that you guys can jump in and chat your answers to as we answer some of these other questions that have come up. So we'll get our first one of those up there to see how close some of you were paying attention or what you may or may not know. We have one question. So you mentioned that the COVID is like indefinitely kind of going on until it is declared. We had a question about who or what is determining that. Do we know what body we're looking to for that information?
Yeah, so that case closing freeze, the technical term for it is called a maintenance of effort. And that is coming from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is the federal agency that's part of that partnership we talked about. So CMS would be the ones deciding when the public health crisis ends. But for the most up-to-date information on what's happening with COVID-specific changes, not only to Medicaid, but also to food stamps and other public benefits administered by Family Support Division, you can go to their website. I think we have a little banner for that, but there's a special COVID website where they're posting all of their COVID-specific program changes. And that would be the best place to take a look for. But as with any time that a case might end, you would get a notice that gives you advance warning of that, and it's called an adverse action notice. And so once the crisis ends, if your coverage is going to close for some reason, you would be notified of that. You don't have to depend on the website to tell you that. Like, you would be told personally that your coverage is ending.
Okay, fantastic. And then we've got a question. So the first thing for true or false for folks to weigh in on here is Medicaid coverage for kids ends at age 18. Do you think that is true or false in Missouri? We have a couple of comments here about the concept of medical divorce. Is that something you have come across much? Specifically the idea of like, so if people are having to get a divorce to meet those sort of spin down requirements and be able to access healthcare, do they have to go through the whole effort of like move to separate homes, things of that nature? Do you have much familiarity with that?
So I've never heard it called medical divorce before, but I understand, the concept of what someone's saying. And it's important to know there are different rules for single people versus married people. On that slide about Mo Health Center for the Age Blind Disabled, there were different income limits for those two groups. So I will say that definitely there are different rules. I have not heard of a lot of people needing to pursue divorce in order to qualify. It's important to know that if, in particular, when you're talking about nursing home care, the state does have a formula to do division of assets, where they will designate one spouse as the institutionalized spouse who needs nursing home care and the other as the community spouse. And there's a recognition that the person who's still living in the community still has bills to pay and things like that. So we can't just say you must throw all your money at the institutionalized spouse. So I know that certainly people face difficult situations where they might be eligible for something different if they were a single person. But I have fortunately not encountered a ton of people who actually needed to consider divorce in order to qualify. But if you have a specific situation that you want me to talk to you about, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, and we will definitely put Jamie's email information back up at the end for folks. So that sounds like a great thing to follow up on. So Jamie, is it true or false that Medicaid for kids in Missouri ends at age 18?
So it ends on their 19th birthday. So that's really important to know. 18-year-olds can still maintain their active coverage until they turn 19.
That is fantastic news. All right, can we put our next myth busted? I hope you all enjoyed that. So all the way up until they are 19, which is good. It gives them a little bit of cushion. Can we put our next question up that people were going to ask about? And then I have another question from further up in this chat I wanted to get to. So we have a question about work requirements. We know it happens at the state level, at the federal level. People talk a lot about adding work requirements to Medicaid. Can you talk a little bit about like what that means and then what kind of impact it would have on Missourians that are using MoHealthNet if it passed?
Sure. So right now, we went through those types of coverage and I kind of broke them out by population group, kids, elderly adults, disabled adults, low-income parents, pregnant women. Of those groups, all those different types of people that might be eligible for Medicaid, most of them cannot work because most of them are kids, as we saw. And then a good share of the rest are elderly or disabled, which by definition, like how we define disabled is unable to work. And they have to meet a pretty high standard to establish that and unable to work for 12 months or longer. So they must have a permanent and total disability. So of all of the people on Medicaid right now, only about 12% are adults who ostensibly could even work because they're not part of one of those groups that can't work. So that's our current situation right now. We do know from other states that have implemented work requirements that a lot of people lose their Medicaid coverage when work requirements are instituted. And a large portion of the people who lose it because they're not meeting work requirements, they actually need it for more administrative reasons. So they're not able to report compliance, or maybe they didn't keep the right kind of records, or maybe they didn't meet the deadline to call the agency. We've seen in other states that often it's very difficult to report your compliance. Sometimes it's very hard to get through on the call center, and people might not have transportation to an office to meet with someone in person. Right now, you actually can't meet someone in person. So there are a lot of barriers that are not just someone doesn't want to work or that someone isn't working. Often people are working. They're just not able. We saw this particularly in Arkansas. They're just not able to report that to the agency. Another thing to think about when it comes to work requirements is that you're imposing a lot of new paperwork requirements on folks. And so that's not only, going to be something that the enrollees have to deal with. That's a lot of staff at the agency who are going to have to deal with a lot of new paperwork processing. So we find that in other states, it costs a good amount of money to stand up and run those programs. And even when they are being run and a lot of resources are going to them, it's still very difficult for people to report compliance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that's one of the major concerns we have had all along. And then I know at MRCC, when we looked in this just recent legislative session, they talked about Medicaid work requirements again in the middle of this pandemic when we were facing these new huge waves of unemployment. And so we were really, really grateful when that didn't get over the line here, because that felt a little like an extra burden. We're getting a couple of questions just about budget, and folks are asking a little bit of things. It's a little bit more Medicaid expansion. So wanting to know about the impact on expansion for like rural hospitals or what the gain would be. So we want to talk in this moment just about Medicaid as it exists, but I can say just sort of factually, the way Medicaid works, as Jamie mentioned, is a federal and state match, right? So right now it's about a 60% federal match to a 40% state match. And that's funded through, provider taxes, through our state and federal taxes, and a lot of different revenue streams. A little bit of it comes out of our general revenue for the state. But the biggest savings folks talk about on an expansion is because if you switch to Medicaid expansion, you go from that 60-40 match to a 90-10 match. And so that's a huge difference in costs. And one of the things that, Jamie's slide referenced is that the biggest number of people who are on Medicaid is children, but they are not the most expensive by any means. So when you change from a like 40% match to a 10% match on something like our elderly population, on pregnant women, on our disability population, those are huge savings because that care is more expensive to cover. And for hospitals, you know, the biggest thing, and Jamie, you can comment on this if you want to, that we see Medicaid impacting hospitals is that a lot of our rural hospitals especially are operating on pretty thin margins, and the uncompensated care of folks that have to come in and use services is something that really impacts that bottom line. So, you know, the idea of having insured people through whatever means versus uninsured people has a really big impact in those communities. I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to add on that. So do we want to put up our next myth buster, Jamie? This one is going to look at our undocumented immigrants. So we hear a lot of the times that undocumented immigrants are accessing Medicaid, that they are eligible for services. What do folks think? Is that true? Somebody got a text message.
Sorry, that was me.
Happens to me all the time.
Do you want me to answer or give people a minute to type something?
Well, you get 4 seconds to answer. False. Holly says it's false. What is the truth around this?
That is correct. Holly's correct. They cannot. So part of the application process requires verification of identity, and that includes citizenship or immigration status.
And what about, so we know that is true of undocumented immigrants. What is the flip side of this? So are legal immigrants eligible for Medicaid benefits?
Sure. So most immigrants are subject to a rule that we call the 5-year bar. So that means they have to wait 5 years before they can get any public benefits, and that includes Medicaid. And that's all types of Medicaid coverage. So people who are subject to that 5-year wait include people who are lawful permanent residents or green card holders. There are some very limited exceptions to that 5-year bar for certain types of immigrants. So one example is people who are survivors of human trafficking. But for the most part, there's a 5-year wait before people can utilize public benefits, even when they're here with valid status.
5 years is such a long time, especially when you need healthcare. I guess the one other thing I would just ask, if folks have any other questions, feel free to ask them. We have a couple minutes here left. You know, I know you work day to day with folks. What are some of the common, you know, frustrations you hear? I hear all the time. Things like, I wait online on the call center for like an hour and then it just rolls me off. What are some of the common things that you hear, or that we think are like reasons that people, you know, Missouri this last year saw a lot of kids get unenrolled, of like some of the like application-y steps in the process that contribute to that?
Sure. So yes, definitely. I will validate your frustration if you have tried to call a call center and had trouble. The data actually shows us it's a little bit better right now. Largely, we think because right now, this is about Medicaid, not food stamps, but food stamps interviews are waived right now, which takes up a lot of time on the call center. And those don't have to happen right now because of COVID. So we think that might be why there's better capacity to reach the agency. But certainly, yes, it is very difficult to reach someone at the agency. Usually. And there, if you've been dealing with the agency for some years, you probably are aware of this, but there was a change in about the last 5 years to the way they organize their work. So it used to be what we call a case-based model, which means if I'm a caseworker, I have these people and I'm responsible for these clients from application all the way through to like administering their benefits, annual renewals, all of their things. So I would notice if something kind of slipped through the cracks. And the agency shifted to a different model that's a task-based model. So now instead of having like a stack of people who I'm in charge of, I review food stamp applications and I review them for every person who comes in. and I don't do the thing before that, and I don't do the thing after that. I do this piece of it. And so that has led to a lot of frustration on the part of participants because number one, you're talking to a new person every time. There's no one who's your caseworker. And a lot of people have very complicated financial situations, a lot of very complicated family arrangements, and they have to retell their story every time they contact the agency, which can be really frustrating. And also, we do find that sometimes things slip through the cracks. Obviously, the workers have the best of intentions, but sometimes because it's so task-based, if something is no one's job, it likely will not get done. And so we do see problems crop up there. That's a really common frustration. Also, a common frustration is that the notices that are sent to people are very confusing and people can't understand them. So a lot of times people are calling the agency just to ask, what does this mean? Because they got a notice, they don't understand it, and they don't have a caseworker anymore who they could call to ask that question, or who might be calling them to explain it to them. So oftentimes we can kind of be the go-between to help decipher the notices and explain what's going on. But those are the biggest frustration points that I hear from people and that I share.
Yeah, and the paperwork side of that, I mean, too, is sometimes there's time windows. We hear of people, it gets mailed to the house and you only have a few days to get that back in the mail. And it's, this giant stack of a tree worth of paper, it feels like. So yeah, it can be intimidating and very confusing as well. We have one question. So it's not super Medicaid specific, but emergency room healthcare available to green card immigrants within that 5-year span. The answer is yes.
Yes. There's a law called EMTALA, and it's been a while since law school, so I don't remember the emergency medicine and transportation something. But basically, yes. If someone goes to an emergency room, then the hospital has an obligation to make sure that they're stable and take care of them in this emergency situation. And the hospital is not going to do like an immigration check to see what's going on. So yes.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. I had one other question that came in through a chat to the page, but can you talk a little bit about fee for service versus managed care, what those two kind of application processes are?
I can, yes. So these are payment models, and it's a little bit in the weeds. I don't want to get into it a ton in this setting, but in Missouri, that Mo HealthNet for the age blind disabled population we talked about, so the elderly people, the disabled people, their Medicaid is fee for service. So that means that when you access a service, the Mo HealthNet, which is our Medicaid agency, they pay a fee. So it's just like it sounds. They're paying money when you use the care. If you're not using care, then you're not costing them money, essentially. The other kinds of Medicaid that we have in Missouri, so the kid Medicaid, all of the other kinds of Medicaid besides that aged, blind, disabled Medicaid are managed care. So my colleague, I might have him pop in if he has something to supplement to my answer here, but I believe there are 3 managed care organizations in Missouri. I do not know their names. I think they've changed recently. But so Missouri contracts with those companies to provide care. Home State, Missouri Care, and United Health. Thank you. So in those situations, Missouri is paying a rate, regardless of whether you're using care or not. They're paying money out just for you to have that coverage, to be on that plan. And then the managed care organization will have a network, and it makes its own rules. It's the one who would be approving or denying. If you needed special services, they're the ones to whom you would submit like prior authorization requests. Whereas if you were on that aged, blind, disabled Medicaid, you would just send it directly to the Medicaid agency. There's no kind of intermediary. There's no contractual relationship with the private company. It's just the state administering Medicaid as your payer.
Fantastic. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I see some other questions. It looks like folks have a lot more questions around expansion, what that's looked like with our neighbors, and what kind of Missouri would need to be up to speed on that, to which I say I am excited that people want to talk more about Medicaid and nerdy things like budget. And I think that we could set up another one with some new experts coming in and helping us talk about that and look at what some of those impacts have been around us. But For right now, I want to say a very sincere thank you to Jamie and Legal Services for not only the work you do all around the state helping Missourians, but for certainly joining us here today. And for everyone who does not already, I invite you to like and follow the Missouri Rural Crisis Center page, as well as Legal Services. You can learn more about our work and really get in touch with us if you have more questions on stuff. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you all soon. Stay tuned for another Ask an Expert because you guys have good questions.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.